going to be Jaxon Smith-Njigba. Jaxon Smith-Njigba, me and Anthony, we talked a lot about him on our show on Sunday. And, there were worries between the both of us, with DK Metcalf being out. Does it help? Does it hurt? And quite honestly, Jaxon Smith-Njigba showed up in a huge way. 37 fantasy points, 7 catches, 180 yards, 2 touchdowns, 13 targets. I mean, this guy, 13.8 yards per target. So he's getting the deep ball as well, not just the intermediate. And prior to that, the week before in Buffalo against a tough defense who Tyreek Hill just struggled against, and Njigba had a decent day too. 6 catches, 69 yards, 12.9 fantasy points on 7 targets. He does get a bye this week. And then he gets San Francisco. So that gives DK Metcalf an extra week to rest and then come back. And, it's kind of one of those things like, is this the breakout for Jaxon Smith-Njigba that we were waiting for? And can he sustain that? Or, is it just, hey, kind of a flex option, borderline low end or wide receiver 2? To me, he's a flex option still. This was a great game. He ascended himself and he played well, but I am not ready to stick and say, hey, JSN's my wide receiver 2 in fantasy this year. Like, that's not making me excited. And it's nothing against him, but like, Tyler Lockett's still a factor there too. I mean, Tyler Lockett caught 3 catches, 63 yards on 4 targets. He didn't get peppered. But DK Metcalf's going to come back. He's been catching a lot of those deep balls. So I'm not ready to say Jaxon Smith-Njigba is a wide receiver 2 yet. He's still a flex for me. I don't know if that game changes your mind, Anthony. How do you see him rest the season at this point?
I was really high on Jaxon Smith-Njigba this offseason. And he hasn't exactly lived up to expectation. Now, if you look right now, for this season, he's a wide receiver 14. But if you have a Jaxon Smith on your fantasy team, you're going to say, I lost a lot of games with Jaxon Smith-Njigba in my lineup because he's not really a wide receiver 14 because he's had 2 spike weeks of 23 and 37, which enhances where his finish. He's really the wide receiver 23. I'm a points per game guy and fantasy points per game. That makes him just qualifying as a wide receiver 2. And again, those 2 spike weeks do play a role. What Jaxon Smith-Njigba really is up to this point, he's a high floor wide receiver 3 in an offense without DK Metcalf. I was telling people on this show to sit JSN because I didn't trust Geno without DK Metcalf. And I don't think we should. If we actually look at Geno Smith, and Jim Coventry pointed this out on the RotoWire show, that a lot of his big games, yardage-wise, are coming in games where they lose, and he's really not scoring touchdowns. Like, no, yesterday's an outlier, 363 and 3 touchdowns. If you look at some of his other big yardage games, he's thrown 1 touchdown in them. He doesn't really look that good. And in the games that they are winning, Geno Smith doesn't have to do much because it's usually a Kenneth Walker game. So I think a lot of these numbers are very much inflated. Now, when it comes to what are we going to do with JSN moving forward, I'm not ready to crown him as a wide receiver 2 moving forward because he's now had 2 opportunities 2 weeks in a row. One, he pops. There was a lot of garbage time scenarios in that game against the Rams and against Buffalo, a solid high floor, 12.9 PPR points and 7 targets. If you're a true wide receiver 1, or if you're ascending, you're going to step up in the tough matchups, and we haven't really seen JSN do that yet. So rest of season, I think he can perform as a wide receiver 2, but he's really just a wide receiver 3 or a high floor flex play for me.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, last thing to close it out. I mean, if you take what I like to do with wide receivers, usually with fantasy players in general, I take the highest game and the lowest game. I remove them. And then I take the average from that. If you do that, he's really averaging somewhere around 13 12 points a game. It's not bad. It's not great. It's average. Like that's the point here. It's a flex play. It's not really like, and when DK Metcalf comes back, look, I mean, he still has Chicago, who's fourth against wide receivers. He still gets the New York Jets. He still has a bye. So like those are 3 tough weeks. Bye, fourth defense, first defense, one of them being in the championship. So that'll close